Hello, I'm Claire Smith and welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about my Maison Christian Dior perfumes. So I have 4 fragrances from this collection, but I'm also going to talk about one fragrance sample that I have handy as well in this video. So if you haven't seen me before, I'm Claire Smith and I make videos all about perfume, perfume science, perfume history, and I also just do some straight perfume reviews. So if that kind of thing interests you, then please do consider subscribing and please do like this video if you do end up liking this video. So yeah, I bought 4 of these fragrances very quickly for me. I'm normally quite a considered purchaser, but there was something about this line that just made me a little bit addicted almost. I just really like these fragrances, and once I tried one, I was hooked. So I'd say as well with this line, it isn't a cheap line, and I'm not someone who spends a lot of money on fragrances generally. So I bought all of these fragrances secondhand, and I would say now that I paid between about £30 and £40 for each of these bottles. So I didn't pay full retail price, because I think that really influences people's opinions of fragrances, doesn't it? How much they paid for them, because obviously your expectations are determined by the price point of the fragrance to a certain extent. So yeah, I ended up going into store and trying a lot of this line, but I would say that the sample that really kicked this off was one from Lizzie, Rose & Jones. If you haven't checked out Lizzie's channel, I will leave it linked down below. But Lizzie actually had quite an extensive collection of Maison Christian Dior fragrances at one point or another. And she sent me a few samples, and yeah, it was enough to get me hooked. So yeah, blame Lizzie. So I think the fragrance sample that really got me hooked in the first place was one that people have described as universally likeable, and I would totally agree with that. And it's actually Gris Dior. So Gris Dior is a fragrance that I remember talking with a couple of other perfume channels about, and we were trying to find any kind of fragrance that we all shared in common, or that we'd all experienced in common, and that we all really liked. And the one that came out was Gris Dior, and I think that's really telling actually. Just a very universally likable fragrance, and I think actually, you know, out of this entire line, if you are going to try just a handful of these fragrances, I think you should really try Gris Dior. So Gris Dior itself launched in 2017, and actually Gris Dior was actually a relaunch of another fragrance called Gris Montaigne that was launched earlier, and Gris Montaigne was actually named after the Avenue Montaigne in Paris, where the Dior boutique is located. But Gris Dior is itself meant to represent the colour grey, so gris means grey in French, that is associated with the Dior fashion house. So how does Gris Dior smell? So Gris Dior is a fragrance that I just find incredibly elegant, and I think the reason for that is that it's a modern chypre fragrance. So this fragrance actually gives me a similar feeling to other fragrances in my collection, fragrances like Coco Mademoiselle by Chanel. It doesn't smell like Coco Mademoiselle, but it definitely has that sort of slightly formal feel to it, something that makes you feel ready for standing up in front of a lot of people, that kind of feeling. It also is something that does have this kind of universal wearability. I wouldn't feel out of place wearing this fragrance with a pair of jeans. It's something that could be dressed up or dressed down. This one really opens much as it dries down. It doesn't really change much or evolve much throughout the fragrance. I think it's something that really starts off quite rosy and quite citrusy, like most chypre fragrances do, with that background of the patchouli and the oak moss. But really as this dries down, it becomes a little bit warmer, it becomes a little bit rosier, and also a little bit woodier. And also you get a touch of a leatheriness to it, which I guess is something to do with the oak moss, I'm not really sure. I think with this fragrance, its beauty is its simplicity. I think it's just something you don't need to think very hard about, and that's why it's universally likable. It doesn't stand out too much, but it is just a very nicely done fragrance. It's got this soft, warm, hazy kind of feel in the dry down, and I think that's just a very cozy feel actually. This fragrance really makes me think of sort of autumn days really, when the sun is sort of dying a little bit and is not quite so strong, but you still do have a little bit of warmth there. It's one that really makes me think of crunchy leaves and that kind of season really. This fragrance is not a beast mode fragrance. It's not something that really projects and is really loud. It's something that lasts ages on my skin, but it's not a loud fragrance. I think if you want a loud fragrance from this line, then maybe check out something like tobacolor. That one is much stronger. But I think if you just want a quiet elegance, this is a good one to go for. If I look coldly at this fragrance, I really don't see what attracts me. There's nothing here that makes me think, wow. On paper, this isn't exciting. This is probably something that looks very much like something I've smelled before. But in reality, it's just very, very well done. I think that's really what attracts people to this fragrance. One thing I'll say about this fragrance is that there is immense batch to batch variation in how this fragrance can smell. And I would say if you've tried this before, go and try it now, because it might smell a little bit different to how it smelled a couple of years ago, because they do use a very high percentage of naturals in these fragrances. And that means that the harvest of jasmine and rose that they put in this fragrance can really change how this fragrance can smell from batch to batch. I also noticed with this fragrance that they've recently relaunched the advertising campaign for it, and they've got now Jenny Ortega, so Wednesday Addams, advertising this fragrance. And that's quite unusual for Dior, because normally they advertise this line as a complete line. They don't single out individual fragrances, but they've clearly clocked that Gris Dior is a massive success for them. And so that they're now pushing this fragrance above all of the other fragrances in this line because they know it's popular. So having lived with Gris Dior for a couple of months now, I think this fragrance is going to be something that I'm definitely going to keep in my collection. It just has a very classy and elegant feel, and I just really enjoy wearing this one. It's a very subtle fragrance and it feels very me. So that's Gris Dior by Dior. So the next fragrance is called Jasmin Des Anges. So Jasmin Des Anges means jasmine of the angels. And actually Jasmin Des Anges is named after the jasmine fields of Grasse in Provence, where Dior grow their jasmine for their fragrances, but also because of the Baie des Anges in Nice, where there are lots of angel sharks that lurk in the water there, and it's a very, very pretty bay. So I can see why they've named this fragrance after that bay. Also, this fragrance is very summery and very light and uplifting. It does feel like a holiday fragrance to me, and I guess that fits in with that bay in Nice again. So this one to me, I think is probably my favourite of the ones that I've bought, but I don't know whether that's the season, because this one just screams summer to me, and I've been really enjoying it in the warmer weather. I think this fragrance isn't cloying, it isn't too much at all, even in 27, 30 degree heat. I would say actually if Gris Dior is elegant, this one is pretty. So this one opens with a very light, uplifting, but beautiful and sweet jasmine. It's something that smells like there's a honeysuckle or something growing by a jasmine plant. This fragrance is definitely the idea of the jasmine plant rather than an indolic or heavy kind of jasmine. It's not an old school jasmine. This is a very modern jasmine to me. As this fragrance dries down, it changes slightly, so it becomes fruitier. And I think actually, even though I like the opening of the fragrance, I like the dry down more. So the dry down, you get like this apricot-y feel. And you also get this sort of muskiness about it. The musk here is not like a powdery or dense or, quite coarse kind of musk. This is a very gentle musk. It's got like haziness to it and that sort of slight darkness to it that is very, very addictive. Again, this one is not beast mode. This is not a very strong fragrance, but it is a very long-lasting fragrance. And I just think it's just so pretty and so summery. But I think when I first tried this in store, I really wasn't sure. And the thing that really convinced me with this one was not the initial spray. It was the dry down. It was the muskiness that was left on my skin and the fruitiness as well of this fragrance. It just smelled very fun and very girly and just very pretty. So that's Jasmin Des Anges by Christian Dior. So the next fragrance is actually called Ambre Nuit. So the idea of Ambre Nuit is that it's a contrast between something ambery and something of the night. And the idea is really that it's something that makes you think of Beauty and the Beast. Something playing off something delicate and something wild. And I get it with this fragrance. So this fragrance is actually a relaunch of an original fragrance that was part of the collection in 2009, and this new version was launched in 2018, and they only list 2 notes, and I would say they are lying. There is more going on in this fragrance than those 2 notes. So the 2 notes they list are Turkish rose and also amber. To me, the thing that really stands out in this fragrance is a spiciness, and the spiciness is there throughout, but it definitely develops more in the dry down. The rose I definitely smell. The rose is something that is quite subtle, but I would say it's a red rose and it's quite a plush rose. It's something that smells almost textured, almost like it's a velvet. And I think that is what I smelt when I first smelt this fragrance on paper. So when I first smelt this in store, I sprayed it on paper because I didn't have any spare skin. And on paper, this fragrance made me think of baby powder. I didn't like it to begin with, but when I smelt it on my skin, it didn't smell like that at all. But I still smell in the rose part of the fragrance, there's some kind of texture. And I guess that's where the baby powder feel was coming from on the paper. So this fragrance in the dry down makes me think of something that's almost incensey. It's not incense, but there's something sort of not smoky, but definitely that sort of fragrant, like resinous feel to this fragrance. Also in the dry down, you get more of the spiciness coming through. So really the dry down is a spicy musk, and the spice that I get from this is a very soft and very powdery cinnamon. The fragrance overall just makes me think of apple pies. It's just got that very warm, cinnamon spiced, but very soft and gentle feel to it. Very enveloping. It's very huggy. It's a very comforting fragrance. It really makes me think of something that's very protective almost. To me, this fragrance is just really dreamy, and actually I'd say this one is probably overtaking Gris Dior in my preferences of this fragrance line, which I really didn't expect from my first sniff of it on paper. This one I would say is a bit louder than Gris Dior, but it still isn't a shouty one. It's not a massive projector, but this one definitely sticks around, probably the longest of all of the fragrances in this video. It's really subtle, but definitely present. So that's Ambre Nuit by Christian Dior. So the next fragrance is one that I only have a sample of because it really wasn't a love for me, and that one is Eden-Roc. So Eden-Roc launched in 2021, and it's named after a very luxurious French hotel on the Riviera, and it's meant to reflect the hotel gardens, the pine trees in the hotel gardens, its proximity to the sea. It's meant to be a little bit solar, and it's meant to have a sort of slightly suntan, lotiony kind of summery feel about it. I think this one just has too much salt for me. It's too mineralic. It's just got something about it, especially in the opening, that is really not pleasant. It actually reminds me of loo blocks in the opening. You know, those sort of dissolvable things you put in the loos to make them smell better. It smells like that to begin. I think that's probably the pine note mixing with the mineral notes that makes me think of those solid loo blocks. As this dries down, the jasmine becomes more prominent, but the jasmine is overlaid with a nondescript citrus. I think it's probably closest to lemon, but I'm really not sure what citrus it is. And there's also a very natural smelling coconut underneath all of that, along with the remains of that mineral and saltiness that's in the opening. I just don't really like this fragrance. It's just a little bit stomach churning for me, and it's just not something that I would want to wear. I do feel that this fragrance is a little bit summery. It does have a slightly solar feel, but it just makes me feel a bit dehydrated. I wear this and I think, oh, I really, really want some water. I just really need a drink. And that's not really what I want from a fragrance. I just don't think this one excites me, and I don't find it pleasant to wear. I think this is definitely an extensive testing required with this one. It's not an easy fragrance for me to like, and I don't think it's an easy fragrance in general for people to like from what I've seen of reviews of it. On me, this didn't last as long as the other fragrances that I've described, and actually this one was reasonably quiet. It was quite a skin scent for quite a lot of its life. So that's Eden-Roc by Christian Dior. So the final fragrance that I've purchased is Holy Peony. So Holy Peony launched in 2019 and is meant to celebrate the peony plant. I have to say, for me, this is more of a rose fragrance, which slightly disappointed me when I first smelt it. So I went to the Dior counter to try this one, and the woman who was on the counter had to get it out of a drawer because she said it's been discontinued. And basically they've put the tester away because they don't want people to be drawn into this one. They're trying to get rid of the stock they have. Once it's sold, and then that will be it. The fragrance will disappear. So this one I think is not that popular. So I think, you know, it's not going to quickly disappear, but I think if you want to try it, probably it's a good idea to go to a Dior counter because the testers will go eventually. So this one, yeah, as I've said, it's a rose fragrance for me. It does have a slight wateriness, it does have a slight sparkliness. There's definitely a greenness to it. To me, it smells a little bit like there could be geranium here. It's a little bit peppery even. But yeah, as this dries down, that sort of red rose, that red fresh rose turns into something woodier. There's a woodiness and a musk that comes in the dry down, but still there's that sort of slightly peppery rose. It doesn't really change that much or evolve really over the fragrance's lifetime. It just, that woodiness becomes more prominent. I think this one is just something that's not that unique, and I'm not sure whether this will stay in my collection long term, but I've been trying it a bit and I've come to the conclusion that you could probably get something very similar to this fragrance at a much lower price point. Clearly this is a nice fragrance, it's very smooth, but I just don't feel like this one is me as much as the others. And I would put this as my least favourite out of the 4 that I've bought. If I were to try to describe this fragrance through some kind of imagery, I think I would say that this is like being in a rose garden on a really hot day after a really sharp rainstorm. So you've still got the warmth in the air, you've still got that rosy feel, but there's definitely a greenness and there's definitely a woodiness to it. So yeah, that's Holy Peony by Christian Dior. So that's the final fragrance in this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, then please press the like button, and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And please let me know, have you tried any fragrances from the Dior Privée line? Which is your favourite? Do you own any of the fragrances from the Dior Privée line? Which should I try next? So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.